Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
When it's time to scale your business, it's time for Shopify. Get everything you need to grow the way you want. Like, all the way. Stack more sales with the best converting checkout on the planet. Track your cha-chings from every channel, right in one spot. And turn real-time reporting into big-time opportunities. Take your business to a whole new level. Switch to Shopify. Start your free trial today.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
People love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Valentino, the legendary Italian designer who built one of the great fashion houses of the modern era, has died at the age of 93. While in his passing, the world loses not merely a designer, but a titan of the industry, whose work reaffirmed timeless elegance, in my opinion, craftsmanship, and the enduring beauty of femininity of the designers. He, of course, was one of Nancy Reagan's favorites. Born Valentino Clemente Ludovico Garavani in Voghera, Italy in 1932, Valentino was trained in the classical traditions of European haute couture at Paris's École des Beaux-Arts and the Chambre Syndicale de Couture Parisienne. I'm not too proficient in the French language. I mostly know Italian, and almost all of those are curse words. Anyway, he apprenticed under masters like Jacques Fath and Cristobal Balenciaga, before returning to Rome, where he founded his own fashion house, one of the true giants of fashion. May he rest in peace. Today is, of course, Martin Luther King Day, a federal holiday observed every year on the third Monday of January. The holiday was actually passed into law and signed into law by President Ronald Reagan in 1983. My good friend Congressman Jack Kemp, a Republican of upstate New York, was one of the major public proponents. And King's birthday became a national holiday after enormous public pressure and national debate. Dr. Martin Luther King plays a very interesting role in the history of American presidential politics. In 1960, he was arrested leading a peaceful demonstration in Birmingham, Alabama, shortly before the 1960 election. There were very real fears as to whether Dr. King was safe in a Birmingham, Alabama jail. John F. Kennedy, running for president in a very tight race with Vice President Richard Nixon, on the advice of his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, the father of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who currently serves as our Secretary of Health and Human Services, made a calculated decision. And while Senator Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, called the governor of Mississippi to demand the release of King, Bobby Kennedy called the judge in the King case. Vice President Richard Nixon was advised by William P. Rogers, who was then the Attorney General under Dwight Eisenhower, that as an officer of the court, Nixon was, of course, a lawyer, it would be improper for him to call the judge. This was an enormous calculated error. Daddy King, that's Martin Luther King Sr., who was at that time the chief pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, changed his position publicly from supporting Richard Nixon, the sitting vice president, to supporting John F. Kennedy. that gesture, which became, of course, front page news across the country, was very definitely a deciding factor in the very narrow defeat of Richard Nixon by Jack Kennedy. What's interesting, however, is that after King's more successful March on Washington, and more precisely after he came out against the Vietnam War, he was wiretapped by the Kennedy administration. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, who hated King and insisted that King was a communist. P.S. No evidence ever emerged to show that King was a communist, although it is clear that one Stanley Levinson among his entourage was thought by King to be a communist. But King was wiretapped, and those wiretaps were approved by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy Sr. Now, those wiretaps, of course, revealed some very embarrassing things about Dr. King. We won't get into them because they're incredibly graphic. But among other things, we learned that Dr. King was having multiple extramarital affairs with as many as 40 women as he carried his fight for civil rights across the country. All of this raises an uncomfortable but essential question. Why are we celebrating the life of a man that the FBI tried to destroy? You see, once the FBI under Hoover, this is one of the most disgraceful chapters in American governmental and political history, but once Hoover obtained the evidence of King's infidelity, he had letters sent to King threatening to expose him and suggesting that the civil rights icon commit suicide. Fortunately, King did not do that. Why does the government hold ceremonies, speeches, and official tributes today for a leader it once treated unfairly like a subversive enemy? The answer is simple: because during the long arc of history, people eventually recognize what the powerful tried to suppress, and that is that Dr. King was right. Despite his personal failures as a man, he had no failures as a leader. He was a great leader who preached nonviolence, in contrast to Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael and the Black Panthers and others of the same era who preached violence. Martin Luther King preached the nonviolence of Gandhi. It's why he was so incredibly successful. Now, in 1968, of course, Dr. King was assassinated. I have serious reservations about whether he was, in fact, assassinated by James Earl Ray, the man who was convicted of his assassination. Ray, of course, later recanted his confession, insisting it had been coerced from him. And it's important to know that the King family sued the FBI, the Secret Service, the U.S. government, and the Memphis police in a civil suit over what they said was the wrongful death, in this case, the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King. And they won that lawsuit, which means a federal civil court essentially certified that King was murdered on the basis of a conspiracy by elements of the federal government rather than murdered by James Earl Ray in Memphis, Tennessee. The death of King caused a conundrum for Richard Nixon, who was then on his way to the greatest comeback in political history. Some of Nixon's advisors said that Nixon should not attend the funeral, and more importantly, the processional march from the church to the cemetery for Dr. King in Atlanta, Georgia. But Nixon made a command decision. He flew privately to meet Coretta King, and did so without any public announcement, going to the King home the day before the funeral. It is there that Richard Nixon privately gave Coretta King a check from Richard and Pat Nixon, which covered the cost of the college educations of the remaining King children. This is a gesture that was not known to history or anyone, of course, until many years after both Richard Nixon and Dr. King were dead. But then came the actual day of the funeral and the procession. Nixon made a decision that he would attend the church service, but that he would not march in the entourage behind the caisson. That's the horse-drawn carriage that was bringing Dr. King's body to the cemetery. Of course, all of his rivals, Senator Eugene McCarthy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, Governor Nelson Rockefeller, all of those who were running for president in 1968 were in that procession. And Nixon had originally planned, according to what he told me, to leave the church from a side door where he was to be taken to the Atlanta airport and returned to New York City. At the end of the succession, however, Wilt Chamberlain, a very formidable figure, sitting next to Nixon at the funeral, just by odd happenstance, looked down at him and said, "Are you ready to march, Mr. Nixon?" Whereupon Nixon, who was not planning to march, decided it was probably a better idea in the face of a very large Wilt Chamberlain to march to the airport. And today I posted a picture on social media of Wilt Chamberlain and former Vice President Richard Nixon marching to the cemetery. After about 3 blocks, with Nixon's advance men kind of trailing the motorcade trailing the march in a limousine, roughly 1 block off the march, not understanding this change in plans, Nixon finally said to Wilt Chamberlain, "You know, Wilt, I'm not going to be able to continue. I have a plane waiting for me to take me back to New York." Whereupon Wilt Chamberlain said to Nixon, "Mr. Nixon, would you mind if I hitch a ride?" So Nixon and Wilt Chamberlain departed the entourage, headed to the cemetery, headed for the airport. By the time they landed in New York City, Wilt Chamberlain had decided that he would actively support Richard Nixon's campaign for president in 1968. He became a major surrogate for Nixon's election. This was interesting in view of the fact that Jackie Robinson, the first African-American big league, National League baseball player, had supported Nixon for president in 1960 over John F. Kennedy. People don't realize this, but despite the fumbling of the question of Dr. King's arrest, the American electorate in 1960 awarded Richard Nixon almost 1/3 of the African-American vote running against John F. Kennedy, which was up until the most recent election in which Donald Trump made major inroads among African Americans, was a high watermark for the Republican Party. The Republican Party percentage of Republican Party nominees for president, percentages of the vote among African Americans went steadily downhill after 1960. Dr. Martin Luther King, born on January 5th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, was of a devout and disciplined Baptist family, prized faith, education, and public service. His father, Dr. Martin Luther King Sr., known as Daddy King, was a teacher and church musician who helped shape her son's early moral seriousness and intellectual ambition. King demonstrated exceptional gifts as a speaker, a student, and a man drawn to a purpose far larger than himself, despite any of his personal failings, because we are all, of course, human. His fatal mistake in terms of his own longevity, I believe, was his public opposition to the war in Vietnam, once King became a vocal opponent to the war, he became a victim of Lyndon Baines Johnson, a victim of J. Edgar Hoover. Just as I believe that John F. Kennedy was assassinated in a conspiracy that involves the CIA, Big Texas Oil, and the mob, but Lyndon Johnson was at the helm of that. Just as I believe Nixon was removed in a silent coup we today call Watergate, which was a setup, I believe that Dr. Martin Luther King was also murdered as a result of a government conspiracy, as confirmed by a federal civil court. Dr. Martin Luther King, rest in peace.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
He likes politics and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone. Where's Roger?
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
And you're back in the Stone Zone. Would-be Venezuelan opposition leader Marina Corina Machado, White House Oval Office meeting with President Donald Trump does not seem to have been a diplomatic triumph. More and more information has now come forward that indicates that Machado's actual background is as a Chavista. She favored the disarmament of the Venezuelan people. She attended a number of international socialist conclaves. And there's serious question whether this is what we called controlled opposition. She did, as a gesture, attempt to give her Nobel Peace Prize to President Donald Trump. That caused the diplomats, let's call them bureaucrats, in Norway. Can anybody think of anything more efficient or effective than a Norwegian bureaucrat? They put out a statement saying that the award was not transferable. President Trump sent them a blistering letter on Monday morning, clear signal that the era of American deference to European elites is over. As news broke early of Trump's message to the Norwegian Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Store, the usual media class rushed to cast doubts on the authenticity of Trump's letter, largely because it didn't sound like the cautious, submissive, butt-kissing tone that they've grown accustomed to hearing from American presidents before Donald Trump became president. That skepticism evaporated once it became clear that the blistering letter that Trump sent to the Norwegian president had been circulated by the National Security Council staff to European ambassadors, underscoring that this was very real and very intentional. In the letter, Trump unapologetically called out Norway and the broader European establishment for their hypocrisy. If I were in Denmark, I'd be demanding a vote today about whether I want to be independent or whether perhaps I'd even like to join the United States. This is the Stone Zone, and we'll be right back.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
Roger Stone, who's a one of the smartest political minds. Roger Stone was persecuted. People forget he's actually a brilliant political analyst.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Few things I have done in my political career have gotten the response that I got late last week when I laid out the reasons why former Congressman Trey Gowdy is the last person in the world who should be Attorney General of the United States. Some have proposed, I think this is rumor-based, that he may be being considered as a potential replacement for Pam Bondi, the current Attorney General. First of all, I can find no evidence that Pam Bondi is leaving that position. In fact, I hear the exact opposite. Also, Pam Bondi was confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Very questionable today, given the dynamics of our politics, whether any Trump appointee, given the recalcitrance of Democrats in the Senate, can be approved for any position. It is a tradition as old as America itself that the 2 U.S. senators from any given state, whether they are Democrats or Republicans, approve the President of the United States nominee for U.S. Attorney. That is the substantial and most important federal prosecutor or prosecutors, depending on the side of the state. Democrats just simply refuse to vote for any of Trump's nominees. They don't need to give a reason. It's called the blue slip. It's not even a law. It's not a regulation. It is a tradition under which we fill the position of federal prosecutors for each federal jurisdiction across the country. So, for example, the 2 U.S. senators from New York, Chuck Schumer, and that sock puppet who serves as the other U.S. senator, just won't for anybody put forward by Trump. They simply refuse. I believe under the Federal Vacancies Act, the president has the right then to fill the job temporarily with an interim U.S. attorney with 120 days. If that person resigned at the end of 119 days, the president could then appoint someone else for 120 days. And if that person resigned in 119 days, the president could then reappoint another person for 120 days. None of them would require Senate approval. Each one of them could take the ongoing cases on which they are working and pass the baton to the next prosecutor. Were I the President of the United States, I would order the acting U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York to open his investigation into Chuck Schumer, because you can take Chuck Schumer's contributions and his votes and put them side by side, and you will find a very troubling pattern. But instead, half of the federal prosecutors' positions in the country remain vacant. Anyway, the idea of Trey Gowdy being the Attorney General is some establishment-backed scheme that must be soundly rejected. Gowdy, you'll remember, gained national prominence when he led the investigation into the Benghazi disaster. That's when our ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, and 3 other Americans were brutally and publicly murdered in a terrorist attack on the U.S. consulate following the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi. Gowdy ranted and raved, and he got a lot of good headlines from Fox News, but ultimately he accomplished nothing whatsoever. First of all, Hillary Clinton insisted falsely that the death of these Americans was based on the release of some video in Libya that was offensive to Muslims. This is a state in which less than 5% of the people in Libya were on the internet. So that was a lie. The terrorists who attacked our Benghazi compound had the floor plan and knew where the safe room was, proving that this was not some spontaneous uprising. Hillary Clinton knew everything, and she should have been prosecuted. But Trey Gowdy's 800-page final report refused to conclude that this whole thing was caused by Hillary Clinton and her aide Cheryl Mills, which is an incomprehensible outcome, suggesting that the entire hearings in which Trey Gowdy ranted and raved was designed just to mollify conservatives. That report confirmed what was already known. The Obama administration failed to anticipate the attack, and then they purposely misled the public by blaming a terrorist assault on a YouTube video that no one in Iraq saw. But Trey Gowdy, who's being pushed for the Attorney General's office by the repugnant Senator Lindsey Graham, repeatedly refused to draw clear conclusions or say that Hillary Clinton was responsible. When committee member Jim Jordan forcefully stated that the administration told one story privately and another one publicly, Gowdy bristled in a move that defined his legacy as a coward rather than a patriot, declined to say whether Clinton lied and was deflecting responsibility back onto the public. The now infamous 11-hour Clinton hearing became political theater rather than the prosecutorial reckoning that it should have been. Gowdy presided over an investigation that escaped serious consequences for Hillary Clinton. It was an utter and unmitigated failure on the part of Trey Gowdy. This is, of course, the same Trey Gowdy who, in the Russian collusion hoax, insisted that John Brennan, a man who, based on the declassified documents released by the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, that prove beyond any dispute or doubt that there was a coup d'etat, that there was a illegal conspiracy to invent the Russian collusion as a narrative, to blame Russian interference assisting Donald Trump's campaign for president, and that was a fraud. But Trey Gowdy says that John Brennan, one of the most despicable characters in American history, a Muslim convert, a man who got caught red-handed spying on the U.S. Senate when they were investigating his use of illegal torture, the man who signed the visas for a majority of the hijackers who attacked America on 9/11 when he was the station chief of the CIA in Riyadh, a man who, according to my good friend Ian Trotter in his new book, made a fortune out of the Russian collusion hoax. It wasn't just a stunning act of treason, but it was even worse, one in which he lined his pockets. But Trey Gowdy says that John Brennan shouldn't be prosecuted. Trey Gowdy says that the embarrassment should be enough for Trey Gowdy. This is the last guy in the world who should be U.S. Attorney General. I mean, he's very, very, very strange. People like to make fun of the shape of my head. Take a look at his head sometime. Jeez. Anyway, thanks for joining us today. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Stone Zone here on the Red Apple Audio Networks, where we bring you hot politics and the inside skinny on what's really happening in Washington and the capitals around the world. The Department of Justice has now opened a civil rights investigation after a Christian church in St. Paul was forcibly disrupted by left-wing thugs in a violation of religious freedom to all of those who were hoping to just peacefully attend services. Department of Justice officials say the probe will examine potential violations of the Federal Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, which also protects Americans' rights to worship at the church or synagogue or mosque of their choice without force, threats, or obstruction. Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, good friend of mine, confirmed the investigations and stated that federal civil rights officers are looking at those who desecrated a house of worship and interfered, in this case, with Christian worshipers. The incident occurred Sunday at City's Church, a Southern Baptist congregation, when anti-ICE protesters stormed into the sanctuary of the church, chanting slogans, and halting the service. The activists accused one of the church's pastors of having ties to immigrations and customs enforcement, although it remains unclear as to why that would be a problem. And it's actually unclear today why this particular church was targeted. Video from inside the church shows shaking congregants as worship was ultimately shut down. This disruption was reportedly co-organized by Black Lives Matter activist Lakima Levy Armstrong, a former president of the Minneapolis NAACP. But it is former CNN host Don Lemon, that sour fruit, who has caught most of the attention because he was present live streaming the event and openly defending the disruption. Now, if he just happened to be at the church live streaming, he clearly knew in advance that this illegal action was taking place. Lemon argued that protests are meant to make people uncomfortable, and he justified the people invading a church service and disrupting people's worship on those grounds. Protesters were heard chanting the name of Renee Good. She's the Antifa terrorist martyr who was shot dead as she tried to run down and kill an ICE agent. Democrats-aligned fundraising groups have sought to capitalize on this tragedy, raising money to target ICE agents with threatening billboards, doxing attempts, and legal action. The Department of Justice investigation must, in this case, lead to serious actions. It's time to charge and submit Don Lemon to a fair trial. But if convicted, he should pay the penalty. See, there are not two sets of rules in America, a set of rules for Roger Stone, General Flynn, Donald Trump, and a different set of rules for failed TV hosts. This guy even got canned by CNN. So you recognize what's happening here. They are inviting President Donald Trump's use of the Insurrection Act of 1807. Things are spinning out of control in Minnesota. Mob violence is taking over the streets. I honestly think, and I'm loath to mention any error by President Donald Trump, a man I know and love for 50 years, a man who saved my life. But because of my friendship with him, there was an illicit and illegal attempt to destroy me. But I think if there was one miscalculation in his first term, he should have crushed the BLM Antifa riots in the fourth year of his presidency. And now, as lawlessness takes over the streets of places like Minnesota and Chicago, I think he has to seriously think about the use of the Insurrection Act of 1807, which of course gives him the legal authority to use American troops on U.S. soil for purposes of law enforcement. It is the one exception to the federal law that would otherwise prevent that. This is now been done several times in American history. John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson both invoked the Insurrection Act to protect civil rights demonstrations in the 1960s. George H.W. Bush used it after the Rodney King riots. Donald Trump is not a man to push. If they fool around, they're going to find out. And this rabble in the streets. Yesterday, I played an audio of a woman calling to burn Minnesota down. That is in itself a crime. Arrest that person. One of Stone's most important rules: use power or lose power. President Donald Trump is a different president in his second presidency, and he is quite serious. I think pushing him is an enormous mistake. He will bring order back to the streets of the cities of Minnesota. And if their violent demonstrations want to spill over into Michigan or Oregon or Washington State, they're going to find a resolute Donald Trump who understands that the very first responsibility of the President of the United States is to preserve order and protect the safety of U.S. citizens. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Don't go away, because we'll be right back.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
He likes politics and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone. Where's Roger?
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
President Donald Trump announces, as we were just saying, that he has 1,500 active duty U.S. Army troops now on standby for probable deployment in Minnesota as unrest continues over federal efforts to enforce immigration laws. Of course, Governor Tim Walz now desperate to cover up the fact that hundreds of millions of dollars were paid out to Somalian-based daycare centers, learning schools, and through other COVID programs. Some of that money actually sent back to Somalia to fund al-Shabaab, the ISIS offshoot there. This could end up being the single largest financial fraud scandal in U.S. taxpayer history. Yesterday, I watched a great video of a citizen journalist who visited 26 individual so-called child daycare clinics, and he visited them morning, noon, and night, and he saw not a single person, never mind a single child. So this is a fraud. And it is very clear that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who lied on her federal naturalization papers to get into the country, is up to her neck in this scandal. So I ask a simple question. Why has she not been arrested and deported? She's in the country illegally. I believe that there is some kind of hearing required. But numerous journalists have proved beyond a doubt that she said that she married her brother in order to enter the country. There are not special rules for members of Congress. Members of Congress are not immune from the United States criminal codes. Now, there are certain rules about what members of Congress can say. So when Eric Swallowswell or Adam Schiff defame me on the House or Senate floor, they are protected by congressional immunity. I've challenged them through the years repeatedly to waive that immunity so that I may sue them, but they refuse to do so. You see, that way they can lie with impunity. Yesterday, we focused on the fact that Eric Swalwell has got himself a big old problem. He's running for governor of California, but he's not eligible to be governor of California because he lives in Washington, D.C. He doesn't own a home or a residence in the state of California. Now, it's clear to me that Eric Swalwell, the congressman from California, is now taking his fashion tips from Steve Bannon because he doesn't look like he has shaved or bathed or washed his hair or brushed his teeth in months. But he's still not going to be governor of California. And he is apoplectic about the fact that investigative journalist Joel Gilbert has filed a formal complaint with the Secretary of State, who by law is required to enforce the law, which says that one must be a legal resident of California in order to run for governor of California. The response by Grizzly Eric Swalwell is to attack Joel Gilbert personally, and his response was, "I'll see you in court." This question won't get decided in court. It has to be decided by the Secretary of State. Just another example, I guess, of those on the left believing that there is some special set of rights for them, that they should not be held to the same laws and requirements as all of the rest of us, as this is the two-termed justice system writ large. I'm absolutely convinced that if the lawlessness in Minnesota continues, particularly if it continues to try to distract attention from the ultra $100 million scandal in which our tax dollars were stolen by Somalians, that Donald Trump is going to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807, which allows the federal government to deploy troops domestically in response to rebellion or other widespread disorder. They are really messing with the wrong guy, and this is not the Trump first term. Meanwhile, President Trump's announced that he is going to sue J.P. Morgan Chase sometime in the next 2 weeks, accusing the Wall Street giant of politically motivated debanking him in the aftermath of January 6, 2021, similar to the financial discrimination that many Americans have faced across the country as the globalists attempt to impose their technocratic police state. I'm Roger Stone. Thank you for joining us today on the Stone Zone. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.